The algorithms are making things happen faster. They're causing context collapse, where you see a video on your For You page, you assume it's for you, your context is collapsed. That video may not have been intended for you. In fact, it definitely wasn't, because there's no way the influencer who made the video has you in mind. They have some imaginary audience in mind that is probably different than who exactly you are. When I am making a video for these short form platforms, this is how I predominantly communicate. I don't know what's going on. The algorithm is called a black box. Something goes in, something weird happens, something goes out. And the something weird happens part, we're constantly making guesses about it. We know that platforms are rewarding certain things, so we try to perform for that. There's like different sides of this that people construct, but that affects our actual sense of what is real. There's a growing perception gap. At least in America, we keep overestimating how extreme other people's political beliefs are. And that's because algorithms amplify extreme perspectives. When you're optimizing for engagement, things that get engagement are things that are extreme.
Hey, Rabble.
Hey, Alice.
How's it going?
It's great.
We have a really exciting episode this week with someone who was not around at the beginning of social media with you. He is a new generation, Gen Z. His name's Adam Aleksic, the author of Algospeak. Algorithms come up in a lot of our episodes. His take on algorithms and their impact on society is a little bit different. So what was interesting to you about chatting with Adam, and where did the conversation go?
His book is about the way in which our languages evolve, and the language is shaped by algorithms. In our discussion, we don't focus on like what is the new emerging word. We talk about the dynamic between creators, communities of users, and the platforms, and how these three forces are co-creating culture and shaping things, and the ways in which how people, each of these players think the system is working is not necessarily how it actually works. And so he has been studying this. He has a social media account, Etymology Nerd, where he analyzes this stuff with millions of followers. And we really get into what is actually happening from the experience of younger users.
Okay, well, let's jump in and take a listen.
I'm super excited to have Adam Aleksic, author of Algospeak, and really insightful commentator, influencer, observer of the way in which social media algorithms shape culture and language. I really enjoyed his book. My daughter, as a teenager, is very nerdy, is a big fan of his content, so I'm very excited to have you on the podcast. Welcome very much, Adam.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
You, in your book, talk about the interactions between communities of people and the algorithms and the social media that give them platforms. I wonder if you could sort of get into that dynamic of the way in which people are trying to find audiences and trying to engage in what's going on, and then how we go forward.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is just a thing that people use language to communicate with other people, to build identity, to forge connection. And that's not new at all, right? We've always been doing that. I'm a big believer that the medium is the message, and it's going to shape how we communicate, and the different settings that are available to us will be kind of important for the actual form of the communication. So algorithms play a role in creating these communities, in defining the boundary of these communities, in creating a vector for language to form and to spread, and all of that is so important to be looking at right now.
There's so much in which we see new language emerge, new words, new grammatical structures, and people often are very judgmental. It tends to be the youth who introduce these things and adopt these things, and people say it is good or bad, and they're judgmental about it, and then they blame the algorithms. But you and your work talk about the way in which the evolution of language is a universal thing, and we just use whatever mediums we have. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the way in which people are shaping their future language and shaping their sense of identity and constructing a future together.
There's a real tendency to use words like brain rot when we're talking about new slang. The implication is that it's rotting your brain, that it's bad for your mind, and there's never anything with language itself that hurts your brain. It's only a new way to creatively express yourself. And you do see a lot of sort of language play happening where people use memes and adapt them to new formats and new situations. And that's not brain rot to me. That is being creative, and that is a human expression. And it is true that we see mostly the kids who are, or the people who are adopting this language with most flexibility are maybe middle schoolers, right? Younger children are still kind of not there in their identity formation. Older people are solidified in our ideas of what language is. And it's these maybe middle schoolers that are finding ways to forge a shared identity for themselves and differentiate their identity from that of adults who are really adapting to these words. And then some other people using it ironically. So many people in my generation, Gen Z, whatever we're calling it, we will use these words ironically to make fun of how middle schoolers currently are actually using these words. And then there are other words that are diffusing more under the radar that nobody's really paying attention to, but I also think those are really impacting our language, and it's all being kind of shaped by the algorithm in the background.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could use some examples of some of these words that are emerging, both the ones that blow up very big and the ones that sort of exist under the radar.
Yeah, the example I use in my book that I opened with is unalive. And this is the classic example of Algospeak, speech used to circumvent algorithmic guidelines. So you can't say kill, or rather the word kill is suppressed on TikTok. So many creators turn to the word unalive, which comes from a 2013 Ultimate Spider-Man meme. But it's being used genuinely as a euphemism online where you can't say the word kill. And then there are middle schoolers offline who have talked to teachers, and their students are writing essays about Hamlet's contemplation of unaliving himself. They're having classroom discussions on the unaliving that happens in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And so this is an online word being used offline. But I think Algospeak is, much more than that. The algorithms are shaping where the words are coming from, how the words are spreading, how quickly the words are getting there. We've all heard at this point the classic brain rot words, rizz and skibbity. If you haven't, rizz means like charisma, skibbity is a nonsense word. But there's many, many more words diffusing. Those are the really obvious memes that stick out. I think people have a negative visceral reaction when they hear unalive being used in real life. But there's other words. I like to use the example of low-key. It's an adverb that means muted or whatever. That party was low-key great. This is a new sense coming from African-American English. Usually the word low-key before, you could say, oh, the lighting is low-key. But now it's the part, there's a new sense of the word. And this is very similar to the old definition. It's diffusing kind of still through social media, but we're not paying attention to it. It's not a meme that sticks out, so it's one that's going to fly under the radar and maybe stick around a lot longer than, say, skibbity.
So in many ways, what we're seeing is the evolution of language, the evolution of ideas that move faster between cultures and communities and be able to find their sub-communities faster. The African-American English has always been a source of cultural and linguistic evolution for American English, even as it has been sort of derided. You've written in your book about the way in which we now are able to find newer subcultures and more divided subcultures, and the way in which cross-cultural communication happens. I wonder if you could talk about that.
Yeah, and like you said, African-American English has been influencing global language forever. The word cool, for example, was borrowed in the 1930s from African-American English. But so these processes are not new, and that's something I try to emphasize, that nothing is like fundamentally new at a how do we interact with each other level. But I do think, for example, the algorithms are making things happen faster. They're causing context collapse, where you see a video on your For You page, you assume it's for you, your context is collapsed. That video may not have been intended for you. In fact, it definitely wasn't, because there's no way the influencer who made the video has you in mind. They have some imaginary audience in mind that is probably different than who exactly you are. But you perceive that video, you perceive this creator using a word, like, I don't know, rizz, like ate, slay, serve. These are all from the ballroom scene in the 1980s, this kind of gay, black, Latino space.
Yeah.
And but these words are now just being used by like white girls. And it's because you see this being used by somebody online. It feels like it's for you. It's on your For You page. It feels like it's personalized. There's also the implication that the algorithm you're training it. It's a personal reflection of your digital self. And once you see something coming from your algorithm, it's meant for you. And you internalize that. And then you repeat it. And one layer down the line, you say the word slay. Now the next person doesn't even know that it comes from a completely different source. And context collapses incredibly quickly through these algorithms. I also think the boundaries of filter bubbles are porous. They're very not well defined, and that allows things to travel with less regulation. There's less of somebody saying, "Ooh, you're using that word. I don't feel like you should be using that word." And so because there's no gatekeeper, there's no boundary marking, the word is allowed to diffuse a lot faster.
We saw this with AOC using the girls are fighting, talking about Elon Musk and Trump.
Exactly. Yeah.
And she used it in reference to the, New York ballroom queer and trans people of color conception of divas fighting. And then all sorts of other people saw this and didn't understand the references that were going on. And it kind of blew up because of that context collapse, because she was bringing between different communities.
A critical thing about memes, for any meme to be successful, it needs to be readapted to new contexts. And when it is, that is in the word, the context collapses, right? But that's how ideas spread. Ideas don't spread if you can't apply them to a new situation. So in a way, context collapse is inevitable. Most people using the word cool today have no idea that it comes from the Yoruba concept of itutu, kind of formulated through cool jazz and then appropriated by the beatniks and the hippies. But you don't think about it. The context is collapsed because your vibe of the word is now completely different. Your idea of who's using the word. So this is, again, normal. I do just think it's accelerated by algorithms.
I was involved with the creation of podcasting originally and part of the original team on Twitter. And the original idea behind it was you just had people you were following. We just had an algorithm. It was a reverse chronological feed, and you decided who you were following and everything else. And very quickly it became clear that there was too much information, and you were asking people to do a lot of work to decide this. And so the initial algorithms that got proposed were just like, who are you following? What are your friends following? Or what are the top trending topics? Or let's sort it by your geography. And over time, there's been more and more effort put into this, more and more effort put into the machine learning, more and more effort put into it. And there's this backlash which says, well, I want to go back to the nostalgia. I want to go back to the world where we didn't have these algorithms. I want to go back to the world where I could just choose what I get to see. You've done a lot of work in terms of talking about the way in which these things are, we expect them now. We see them. Facebook released these studies where they tried to give people a chronological feed, and they went and they chose algorithmic feeds.
The people don't want it, or at least they don't know that they want it. It feels like you want the thing that grabs your engagement, because the thing to understand about these algorithms is that they are engagement optimizing. They are trying to grab your attention. They're screaming at you all the time, and it's hard to differentiate between what you want on the top conscious observer level and what your subconscious will respond to. And these are different things. Like, your subconscious will respond to rage bait and clickbait, but those are just there to generate engagement. And we all know we don't really like rage bait and clickbait, and yet that will still spread because it's good for engagement. So what we have is like a confusion of metric and target here. You start out with, maybe there was a well-meaning intent to have a good user experience. Of course, there was this negative intent on the platform's part to commodify everything, and the more we can categorize how people will engage with something, the better we can target ads. So this is also a part of it. And at some point, engagement becomes this flattened metric of what attention really is. Attention is your ability to select what you're looking at. There's also evaluations of social prestige. Like, you would give more attention to someone in the past if you respected them. There's no way to quantify respect, though, so we lose that. And now we get the stupid clickbait, rage bait videos, and you don't respect the person, but you're still going to give them your engagement. And unfortunately, that's now getting tied to attention more and more.
And so we have this system of monolithic algorithms that, right now we have a few very large platforms, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, especially the shorts. Those are the biggest ones. And they're very similar in how they work. And one of the things that drove the creation of Blue Sky and was the original idea behind it was, at first it was just, let's stop the moderation problem. We'll solve the trust and safety problem by being able to have multiple sources we can go and do trust and safety. You know, you can go to Black Sky and you can have Rudy's team do the trust and safety team, and it'll be based on, you know, the African-American view of what trust and safety, or, you know, you can go to the Arab Sky folks and they would do, you know, something out of Qatar. But very quickly after Jay and Paul and the folks founded Blue Sky and started building it, people realized that it wasn't just the moderation and that there needed to be algorithmic choice. And this is something I've talked a lot about. What are we achieving by algorithmic choice? And sort of how does that free up potentially the creators to exist in a not a monoculture?
It's agency on both the creator's half and the user's behalf. When I am making a video for these short form platforms, this is how I predominantly communicate. I don't know what's going on. The algorithm is called a black box. Something goes in, something weird happens, something goes out. And the something weird happens part, we're constantly making guesses about it. We know that platforms are rewarding certain things, so we try to perform for that. So when I'm talking, the language choice I'm using, I know all of it's being analyzed by the algorithm. I'm very deliberate with scripting out my videos, with choosing my words in such a way that I can not only communicate my message, but I can go viral at the same time, because those are synonymous to me. So I have very little choice in the way in which I communicate. And if you have more flexibility with how content is distributed, you have greater flexibility with how you can express yourself within that content. And on the user's half, there's a constant pervasive anxiety the user feels on TikTok and on YouTube and on Instagram, where we constantly feel like we have to train our algorithms to better reflect who we really are, and it will never match up because, again, they're not quite well-intentioned. They're not doing this to show you the best thing you want to see. They're, at the end of the day, they're trying to make money off of your attention. So they're always going to show you something a little bit different. And the algorithm's going to drift, and the content on the algorithm's going to drift. You're always going to have to constantly fight this uphill battle to see what you actually want to see, and creators are fighting this uphill battle to communicate what we want to communicate. And if you have more algorithmic choice, you have more freedom on both parts.
I mean, it's this weird antagonistic relationship. Before we had social media, we had a way of deciding what content reached the world. And those were editors, those were producers, those were people who owned radio and television stations. Those are, you know, the editors and publishers at newspapers and magazines and book publishers. And so, you know, one of the dreams for me, having been doing this a long time, was let's overthrow those gatekeepers. And let's replace them, and let's democratize the means of communication. I at one point argued that it shouldn't be called social media, it should be called participatory media. And participatory is a very long, difficult word to pronounce, and like obviously we ended up with social media, which makes sense. But that was an attempt to unseat the power dynamic where we had a few people who controlled the medium, and they could then define what messages reach the world. Now we have a system where we have a few different people. Ultimately, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Evan Spiegel, the Google execs, the TikTok execs who decide it, but they're not deciding exactly what goes in. They're actually sort of tweaking these algorithms that they don't entirely understand.
Not even the engineers
themselves.
know what's going on in the black box. That's important to understand. Like, they don't have a clue either, right?
Yeah. It's like you don't know why GPT exactly says, you know, ChatGPT says what it says. You know what it's trained on, and you know what its what its prompts are.
But you do know that tweaks in the input and tweaks in the reinforcement learning are going to change the output. You know that if Elon Musk decides he doesn't like the output of a question, he goes back and changes something in the controls, and then the next day Grok is outputting something else. We know that this happens. We've observed this happen multiple times. We know that Meta changed its content guidelines in January after Donald Trump got elected, and all of a sudden we started getting a lot more like racist stuff on Instagram Reels. We started getting a lot more AI slop because they allowed for more AI generated content. They allowed for more less woke DEI stuff. So anything goes now. You can just say the N-word on Instagram Reels. It's crazy. But that happened because of meta responding to the current political moment, and yet that actually affects what we see, the reality we construct based on the videos that we're getting. That's insane to me.
And we have this tendency to assume that what we see in social media is similar to what everyone else sees. You see this in DC politicians, like senators and congressmen, who go and they're like, TikTok is just young girls dancing. And you're like, boy, what are you liking? But that, that creates this reinforcing bubble, these sets of memes that drive people to a finding ever more specific niches of content, and then drives them off the big platforms and drives them to 4chan and Discord servers and other forums and things like that, and eventually drives some of those people into these weird alt-right subculture stuff that pop into main society, and we get these memes that no one knows what they mean.
We're recording this right in the wake of the Charlie Kirk shooting, and everybody's puzzling over the bullet casings that say, like, oh, whoa, what's this? And the Bella Ciao reference, and if you're reading this, you're gay, LMAO. And these are all kind of sort of 2010 4chan memes. And it's important to understand the context of memes if we're understanding the context of the political moment. I also think you're raising such an important point about how people construct their sense of reality. Like, you think TikTok is all like dancing girls because you're getting dancing girls on TikTok, but really there's other people who are just getting like weird linguistics videos on TikTok. So there's like different sides of this that people construct, but that affects our actual sense of what is real. There's a growing perception gap. At least in America, we keep overestimating how extreme other people's political beliefs are. And that's because algorithms amplify extreme perspectives. When you're optimizing for engagement, things that get engagement are things that are extreme. AOC and Marjorie Taylor Greene are going to get more views than my congressman, where I grew up in Albany, New York. My congressman's Paul Tonko. He's really boring. He's not going to go viral. So what you're going to see is people on either end of the spectrum go way more viral. You're going to have a more extreme version of reality. You're going to construct a more overrepresented view of what society is like. And the memes that work are also kind of either pushing extreme rhetoric or something that's really good for engagement, but there is a subversive element to these memes that you can hide an idea inside of it. A lot of the times, people don't even notice this. It just gets interpreted as funny and people spread it. It's relatable or something. And then later on, somebody else might reinterpret that original idea and fall further and further into echo chambers. And this has been discussed to death, how algorithms can lead people down into rabbit holes and their pipelines to the alt-right and the manosphere and stuff like that. But all of that is such an important element of what's going on.
So then the question to me, or the question that I think is this audience that I have with Revolution Social, which is very much people who are concerned about building new social media platforms, understanding how did we get here? What were the incentives, the technology, the social, economic dynamics that created the world we have today in social media? What do we do to fix this? Because it's not so easy as saying, let's ban minors, or let's, get rid of the algorithms, or do everything else. Like, when I've built social media platforms recently that had no algorithms and I got creators on them, they joined and they're like, it's nice. I now control the relationship with my audience and I can post whatever I want, but there's no system that is taking the stuff that is good and bringing it out to that audience.
There was such an important part to what you said a few turns ago about how it is, in a way, democratic, as long as you understand the nature of what the algorithm is rewarding and you are able to mold your message in a way that works for the platform. Anybody can share their opinion in a way that is unburdened from the traditional gatekeepers, and I find that really, really good. And there is a kind of democratic aspect to how some ideas are spread, but we have to remember that everything that does spreads through this lens of what gets engagement, so it's always going to be flattened and commodified and reduced in a way that I don't like, in a way that probably most creators don't like, and we always have like this back and forth of, algorithms great for us doing our job, but it's terrible in terms of like everything else. I personally really think it's important to mix forms of media, And each media has a bias. It has a way of limiting the scope of what you see and understand and how you build that worldview, contributing to things like the perception gap. If you look at TikTok, that's good because it gives you that democratic access in a way. You should be aware of how it's not as well. But if you read a book, that also gives you a different type of access. And you should be aware of how that's biased by traditional gatekeepers manufacturing consent. If you should go to Substack, where there actually, I think some incredible writers right now are on Substack, and they have direct access to their audience. It's very good. It has its own problems. It doesn't reward ideas in the same way an algorithm might, or it doesn't give the institutional prestige that a book might. All of these are biased. And we need to recognize those biases. We need to recognize how important it is to build as strong of a worldview as possible so that we can have a more holistic picture of society and of ourselves, and be engaging with all these with a deliberate, skeptical lens and not just passively consuming, because that's what they want us to do.
Yeah, absolutely. The way in which these prestige plays such a role, I think about your own work, where you have reached a massive audience online and social media and everything else, and then chose to write a book, which is
thanks.
The book's really good. People should buy the book. It's fascinating. And I also recommend people do the audiobook because you narrate it yourself, and listening to you narrate your book and the language you use is so informed by all the work you've done on social media, as opposed to traditional audiobook readers. You use a different voice than normal authors do.
They kept telling me when I was recording to talk slower, because I get so used to my TikTok voice. And this is a whole thing I talk about, how there's a different intonation you speak when you're on broadcast TV or on radio or on TikTok. There's a certain kind of accent you use. And I'm also just a fast talker naturally, but I do think it's partially conditioned by my engagement with this medium, and this is the predominant way I communicate. So I do think about the prestige thing a lot. I think prestige can be very good. For example, fact checking. It's very hard to fact check on TikTok, where anybody who asserts themselves confidently into a camera can go viral, and you don't have a way of verifying whether this person knows what they're talking about or whether they're completely, going off the rails. Part of why I chose to write this book is I really do believe in making and consuming as many forms of media as possible. I think there's some things I couldn't say on TikTok, like the stuff about Unalive. I can't even talk about because I have to use the word kill, so I can't explain what Unalive is about. So it's really good that I have the book as well. And now you can read both of those and maybe look at all of my production of my work in a better holistic sense and understand better what my message is. But also, I guess I also wanted the prestige of people trusting me more as a linguist, because I genuinely do believe I know what I'm talking about. But if I'm just a guy yapping on TikTok, you're not going to trust me. So there's a lot of benefits to different types of media. I really, really believe that.
Yeah, and different types of media have different ways in which they're optimized. One of the fascinating things is with the introduction of the printing press. Jeff Jarvis writes about this in his books on the Gutenberg press. The initial perception of the printed word was that it is an untrustworthy and rumor-driven thing, and you couldn't trust the written word and the pamphlets and the books the same way you could trust someone who spoke to you in a marketplace. So if you speak to someone in a market, you have a social relationship with that person, you know them, you have that trust relationship, you can decide whether or not they're an authoritative source of it. And then over time, we've flipped that around and we've decided that the written word goes through a process of editorial process. We've developed chapters and references and all these other things that exist in the written word. And now we've decided that the spoken word is the untrustworthy thing.
There's such a fascinating thing with how you defend a thesis, right? There's still some of that old tradition of doing an oral defense, but the most important product at the end of the day is this written work. There's really interesting different prestige we've given at different points in time. And it's really funny ascribing that label brain rot when in the past, I think, was it Plato who was really upset at the rise of parchment and papyrus and how that would ruin oral tradition and our memories because we remembered things through all these complicated strategies, and once you write things down, that affects your ability to memorize things the same way, to create an extension of yourself.
Everything we say about the dangers and the terrible things of social media, Plato said about writing.
Yes, so that is a really important context to remember things through.
And everything we say about the youth and the next generation, you can trace all the way back to the ancient Greeks about saying about each new generation that grew up there. So like there's something sort of universal about that. And yet the technology does change. The technology evolves. And you've talked in podcasts, and I believe some in your book, about the way in which video, audio, this sort of thing is leading us to a world that is much more spoken, much more communicated in video, and much less driven by writing itself. So I wonder if you could talk about sort of how you're seeing that evolution.
Yeah, there's maybe a loop back to that auditory primacy, but also the video part, the visual element is so important. Things don't work as just audio clips anymore. Why are we filming this podcast? Because, that's how you better spread your podcast to other people, that there's a video clip you can generate. Right, all podcasts becoming visual. There's that audio-visual element, and I think the logic of social media is rapidly switching your attention between different auditory and visual stimuli. That is how that operates. And attention is this very weird, flexible thing. And again, I don't think what they're doing is exactly attention. It's some weird, flattened version of attention that they're able to pull out, and it's just engagement. It's what get clicks. For example, I think in the 19th century, the general scholarly consensus is that our discussion of attention and how we perceive things in our art, in our discourse, and the technologies we built all kind of switch from ambient perception to focused. So like ambient perception could be like smells, which linger in a room, and they kind of make a part of the gestalt of what you're perceiving. But then in how we start depicting paintings and the technology we're designing is all about bam, 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 making attention switch from one thing to another. The telegraph comes. Now it's about news every day instead of, whenever it shows up by horseback on your village, that's how news would be diffused in the past. So the nature of attention and how we understand what it means to perceive something is different. And I think algorithms are also the general neural network based stuff. So ChatGPT is all part of this. Things are maybe getting a little bit more ambient again because we don't really know what's happening. It's another inflection point, I think, for attention.
I think that we over and underestimate how much things are changing. If you look back a couple of generations, memorizing a chapter and verse of the Bible was considered a very important thing in American society, that you could understand the references, that you could understand the quotes, that you could talk about it in that way. And we did so much in our education system to teach people how to concentrate in that way, how to do that kind of memorization, how to do that kind of math, how to do that kind of work that was considered essential because we didn't have access to a universal source of human knowledge. You didn't have something that you could just ask the question of. You didn't have Wikipedia. You didn't have a I'm old enough that my math teacher said, what, do you expect to have a calculator in your pocket your whole life?
Totally. And we stopped teaching shorthand and cursive. And it's just a fact that our cultural moment moves on and we kind of switch. We're no longer working with the stone and chisel. I think most people are happy with that, right? So we move on. We do romanticize the past. I think we have a tendency to over-romanticize previous cultural moments because we don't like accepting that we happen to be in a new cultural moment. The fact of the matter is, right now, these algorithms and AI are strongly affecting our culture, and we like to pretend, oh, this is terrible. I wish for that time when I was writing more in cursive, but I think we're over-romanticizing the past, and when we do that, we tend to undervalue this exact moment we're in when this is the most important thing we should be valuing. What is actually happening right now? And being aware of that too. There are a lot of things about the past. Oh yeah, we've always not liked when kids use slang. We've always been concerned about the state of technology. And yet it seems like we're fine. At the same time, I do think we should be incredibly concerned and aware of the technological mediums and what they're doing, like how these platforms are surveilling us, how they're controlling and commodifying our attention.
Absolutely. And the lack of agency in that, the idea that somehow someone else is just giving us this prepackaged thing. We don't get any choice in kind of algorithms. There's no way that you can leave with your followers from TikTok to go to some other platform. You can create a new account.
Well, I've been trying to corral them onto my Substack and to read my book.
So one of the things that I've been campaigning for is this idea of a social media bill of rights. And the idea behind it is that you should own your identity and your relationship to your followers. That's really central to Substack. And I talked to Chris Best about that. And you should have the right to exit. You should be able to right to sort of interoperability exit. And that's what I was talking to Cory Doctorow about. And that you should have the right to governance over your algorithms, you know, the right to say what the moderation rules are. And I was talking to Yoel Roth, who ran Trust and Safety on Twitter, about, you know, his research into that. And you should have the right to decide what algorithms you have. You're a creator who has been very good at building out the audience of things, and you are working towards moving them to your Substack. And the platforms are fighting against you. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your motivations for the conflict, what it is like to try and cultivate an audience that you have a direct community connection to on your own terms.
Yeah, I think in those 4 bullet points you listed, you pretty much laid out the exact understanding of why Substack is so much better to be a creator on. At the end of the day, I'm not here to make money as much as I'm here. I think my goal of what I'm doing is come up with cool ideas and spread cool ideas and get enough money to support my living. But like, I'm not monetizing my Substack, and I don't run ads on TikTok, for example. I think, thankfully, I'm able to finance myself through the book as well. So, and different people have different goals here. My personal goal is to talk about this stuff and talk about ideas that I think are important in as effective of a way as possible. And I think that I have been ramming home this point of mixing media, but I really, really want to emphasize that again. Even though I'm trying to get the people on Substack, I'm also still talking on TikTok, because that's where you reach people first. That's how you can Trojan horse through the idea of, well, okay, language is cool. Okay, maybe these platforms are affecting us. Like, I can kind of get through all these concepts. If you want to learn more, all right, now there's this other form of media you can engage with more wholly, with more nuance, with less ambiguity. Yeah, that's kind of my general philosophy of how I approach things. I do love the creator agency and the power and the ability to exit, and all those things are amazing. I also want the ability to reach my audience. So maybe that's that other thing that was missing, and that's why I like to balance the media.
Well, and Substack is doing experiments with that. Originally, it was just email. It was just, they just used the protocol of email. They just sent out the email newsletters. You could go to the website, you could view it. And now they have an app. They have the ability to subscribe to stuff. They have the ability to...
The notes feature is a little algorithmic.
Yeah, the little, like, you can do videos and podcasts and tweet like comments and things like that, which is both good because you get this thing, but also represents their own stepping towards platform lock-in.
Yeah, it's the paradox of social media. I guess it's tied to enshittification or platformization. But it's inevitable, I guess. Also, engagement optimization. It's hard to compete as a platform unless you're doing something with engagement. I think Substack and Blue Sky are maybe doing the best jobs out there. But at the same time, are they? Because they don't have the most users. And if my goal is to reach as broad of a base as possible, I do want ability to access those users. So it is both things at once, right?
When I originally pitched, I think it was 2018, I went into Jack and Biz and I pitched the idea of a social media protocol alternative to Twitter. And they were excited about it. They're like, this is really cool. Like, we had this whole vision, Twitter was a protocol at one point and then the technology didn't work. And they were aligned vision wise, but then they went to the Twitter executives underneath them. And the Twitter executives are like, what the hell are you talking about? Why would we give up this control? And then I went out to the larger world of like investors and people, and everyone's like, oh, that sounds like a great idea, but like, you'll never get anyone to switch. And I'm like, yeah, but as much as you like the people who are running these platforms now, or as much as you're frustrated with it, like it is a problem that someone's on top of it. And in some ways, Elon Musk taking over Twitter was this gift.
It made it even more obvious, like, yeah, what these platforms are doing.
You could see the problems. I mean, everyone knew the problems, but now at least they were bad enough that people might jump ship.
Yeah, Elon's throwing it out into the open. I think at least people are more aware of Instagram becoming racist too. I've seen people in the comments section like refer to it as the racism app. So there is a general awareness of what's going on. I think also that moment in January when TikTok did its weird about face and it thanked President Trump in a message to the 200 million Americans on TikTok. People aren't that stupid. They know this is like propaganda. And there is that general awareness, which I think is becoming more and more present, especially among younger generations who I think are actually, the last chapter of my book is Are We Cooked? Which means like, are we screwed? Is it over? I think the younger generation isn't as cooked as maybe the older generations. It's the boomers that are being tricked by like AI slop on Facebook. Young people generally are growing up in this environment where they have this high degree of media literacy in the new medium. Maybe there's declining literacy in the old medium of reading and writing, but actually they're incredibly literate in how algorithms reward things, what the platforms are doing. At least I think so, and I think there is a general growing cultural awareness.
And we always regret the thing that happened. I mean, there are these articles regretting the decline of young women because they spend all their time sitting around reading novels. And like it's causing, distress and mental health, and they're having these crises, or there was a big moral panic about the introduction of the bicycle because it was causing young people to have agency. They could go off and see whoever they wanted. And they lost their mental health was like, and we see that same stuff being described today. We see people then looking at that and saying, let's do ID verification. Let's do age verification. Let's block minors from these things. And it almost always comes from an older generation of adults who are themselves freaking out about it.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest dangers to society right now is like the cell phone bans in school. And I think kids should be paying attention, but it's what it's being used, and the porn bans and stuff. These like general blanket bans on things are being used to shoehorn through policies which are actually paradoxically very good for the platforms. Now that there is age verification, you have to upload a photo ID. Now they have like more biometric information or whatever about who you are as a person, which helps their end of surveillance capitalism. It's used for more control, more order in society, instead of that democratic goal we're striving toward. And it's, if anything, we should have classes in algorithmic literacy. By like banning the phones like completely, you are preventing people from growing that understanding and awareness of exactly what's happening on the internet. It's like the equivalent of a book ban in the past. And I know that sounds like a crazy thing. Like, I agree that there's very bad things happening on these platforms, that there's dangers on the internet, but books have dangerous ideas too. We generally now seem to agree that books are good as a concept. There are many very good things on the internet. Wikipedia is, what a beautiful resource. There is some incredible informative TikTok like information out there. I'm so glad the internet exists. Also, I hate the internet. So it's like, it's going to be both things at once.
I think that is so important. Like the two things. One, if we implement strong age verification, ID verification, because that's what it really means is, papers, please, then the only companies that can do it are the biggest companies. It's like creating this moat that says these 5 or 10 companies are the only ones that can afford to do age verification. Blue Sky is not accessible in Mississippi because the company, for all of its structure and money and everything else, was not able to implement the age verification. You have to do age verification to look at some Wikipedia pages, like to listen to some music on Spotify. It's absolutely crazy, and it's not the solution because it doesn't even, like, it locks in these abusive companies, gives them more power over the situation.
Helps them see like a state. Yeah.
And yeah, absolutely. The book Seeing Like a State is super, super important to understand. Like, the state wants to make all of this stuff tangible and visible and give it metrics and controls over it. And when a large part of society or the economy exists outside something that is visible and tangible to the state freaks out because it can't regulate it. Even if it is well-meaning, it can't make sense of it.
And I believe a lot of these phone ban people are well-meaning, but they're shooting society in the foot. We need the media literacy in the same way we need regular book literacy. Literacy is being aware of how the medium is affecting you. That is so incredibly important.
And if we go and we ban it, two things are going to happen. One, we all provide IDs, we restructure the thing, but also, what teenager who really wanted to buy alcohol couldn't figure out how to buy alcohol? Like we're like, this is an addictive drug, we should ban it. Did it stop teenagers smoking and drinking? No.
I guarantee you, if you're trying to stop kids from looking up porn, they're gonna find it's not gonna.
To me, it's even worse, because instead of doing the education stuff, doing the having people do it, doing a kind of regulation and structure that makes it healthier, we can now pretend that there's nobody under 16 on social media. And so we can remove all of the protections that exist for them because they're all using an older sibling or adult's ID for it, or they've used some video game to do facial recognition. So we now absolve these companies from actually addressing the problem.
That's the classic offload the blame from the companies onto the users and onto the same stuff's been done with climate and everything else. It's just the classic approach.
I want to talk a little bit about AI, because AI is so important. It's shaping social media. We're seeing more and more content, and there's a way in which AI is like, there's a backlash against AI. They're like, people don't, like, it's all fake, everything else. And people forget that there is almost always a person driving the prompting and putting it together. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about sort of the struggle for individual identity and community identity and authenticity in a world in which more and more content is created by AI.
Yeah, there's a few things going on here. First, AI is kind of the same underlying infrastructure as algorithms in a different sort of expression, that there is that black box, that there are these neural networks, that there is machine learning going on. And nobody really knows how it's happening. It's maybe a little bit more ambient than the previous sort of focused line-by-line coding when we're looking at actual personal interactions with ChatGPT. And then there's AI being used generatively to create content. So there's a lot of rabbit holes to go down here. I guess first with personal AI, with ChatGPT, this is designed to be sycophantic and yet sound authoritative, which is, I think, incredibly dangerous. It has these mirroring capabilities that make it sound like you're talking to a friend. And again, it's the same thing as the For You page. The whole promise is personalization. Look at the UI of ChatGPT. It's designed like a messaging app, implying that you're talking to somebody like a friend. And it's linguistically designed to sound like your friend. And, we have sort of emerging cases of what's being called AI psychosis, or people being coaxed into or given strategies for suicide or something like that. I don't want to be too alarmist, and at the same time, there are real dangers to not talking to people about this stuff and talking to your AI, which you assume that this is real in the same way that you assume the political representation of extreme views is real. You see ChatGPT spitting out language that you think is English, but it's actually a flattened representation of English that, for example, we know that it uses the word delve at higher rates, and yet that's bleeding into our perceptions. Two new studies have come out in the last month saying that humans in our spontaneous spoken conversations are using the word delve more. And that's because we're seeing it being used in AI, and we're internalizing that bias, repeating it ourselves.
And I've heard you talk about the origin of delve. Isn't it related to words that went into the training of some of the AI?
There was probably slight biases in the reinforcement learning process that had to do with workers in Nigeria who do say delve at higher rates, and then that got lexically overrepresented at even higher rates than it actually existed. But one way or there's something wrong with the input. Again, what these neural networks, it's input, something crazy happens, output. So either in the input or in the something crazy happens part, or both, we end up getting a slight difference. And it's not just language. I like using language because that's a clear example we can point to and track over time, but the same thing is happening with political biases, social biases. We know that ChatGPT in Farsi is far more conservative than ChatGPT in English, because the input is on text that is went through the manufactured consent of an authoritarian conservative government. So obviously you're going to have more conservative outputs.
So the printed world of Farsi is shaped by the fact that there's a single government that dominates the world of Farsi, and they've constrained what is published and what is said.
Exactly.
And what is published online. So therefore, Farsi doesn't have the liberal bias that English does in large language models.
Input affects the output. I mean, also, depending on who the AI is talking to, depending on how the neural networks are tweaked, we're going to have different outputs. We know Grok is going to be more conservative than, Anthropic AI. So we know this is happening on the personal level. Also on a content level, it's so important to be talking about like slop capitalism. Why do these AI platforms want slop? Meta, like I said, in January started allowing more slop. They are actively incentivizing new AI-generated accounts. They're experimenting with AI comments and AI profiles. They've been doing this. They want you to be interacting with AI. Dead internet theory used to be this like crazy conspiracy theory about you're more surrounded by bots than humans on the internet. I think it's a lot more real now because it's in their profit incentive. The more AI that fills up social media, the less they have to pay human creators. That's one. Second, they can kind of control your experience more, which helps for that seeing like a state thing. Third, they can, ram through more advertisements or whatever. Like all this is good for their business.
And you feel like you're in a busy place. It's like there's a line outside the club. The place is packed. You don't realize that everybody around you, or a lot of them, are these AI things making comments and liking stuff. And we know that Meta lies. They lied about when they introduced video, they went to all these media companies, these news outlets, and they said, look, we want you to use video because it makes sense for their ads. They lied about all the viewer numbers on those videos. And what's to say that they won't, we know that they have not changed their tune. They will now use AI to lie about the existence of a crowd.
Yeah, it's again that perception of effervescence which makes social media work at all. And I'm really concerned that this can be used to negatively target us through misinformation. There was an article in the New York Times last month about this Chinese company Aleksic, which is using AI to target dissidents, like just flood the zone with information that is irrelevant or maybe even supporting China or something or and that affects what you see. And again, what you see is not some neutral thing. It affects how you construct reality. We start saying the word delve more. We start overestimating our political opponents' beliefs. This is really affecting how we think and how we see the world. And there are seeds of ideas in the same way that memes can be reinterpreted with the seed of an idea. I think AI slop, especially on Instagram Reels, I've done some work analyzing there's some really, really racist Reels on Instagram with one with 30 million views depicts a group of shirtless black men running towards KFC and eating fried chicken while the underlying audio is the N-word repeated. This is an actual video with 30 million views. And I interviewed the creator of that video and I asked him, why'd you make this video? And he said, well, I thought it'd be good for getting likes and views.
He doesn't believe it. It doesn't it's
he probably, is racist, but he's not doing this out of active racist intent. So to me, this is more like banality of the evil, banality of the algorithm. It's like you're just doing this because the incentive structure is there for you to replicate this because these bullshit platforms have created this system for you to replicate. That's what the engagement optimization algorithms at the end of the day are going to send you because unfortunately, that kind of video is going to generate engagement.
Yeah, because it's going to generate engagement both from the people who are racist and like it, they want to share it, but also the people who react to it, the people who get pissed off it.
Reacting to it. And the reaction could be a comment. It could be you watching out of disgust. And that disgust watch is still engagement.
It's a disturbing dynamic and it's very hard to fix because the economic incentives around this stuff are driven by advertisers, are driven by engagement, creating you a space in which you feel the need to watch the next thing, watch the next video. get pissed off and create the drama around it. And we're not new. Like, we evolved as humans, as social creatures hundreds of thousands of years ago, and where drama and gossip were so important to what we do because it's about your personal safety. And, I see this in some of my kids. It's funny because they watch YouTube drama. They watch the drama between creators, and they have this parasocial relationship with it. It has meaning to them. And my younger one, he's 15, and he doesn't watch the original content. Like, he isn't consuming the original stuff, is just consuming the drama around it. And that is like a very teenager thing to do. Like, it's not that different from reality television, but it's not necessarily healthy. And it's not easy to figure out how to get us out of that.
If I can recommend one book to the listeners apart from Seeing Like a State, it would be Society of the Spectacle by Guy Debord, and how their goal is the premise is like, this is an interesting thing to look at, and then you look at this thing and it presents itself as a really good thing, and you get distracted by it and forget that there's other things to look at. And he wrote that about TV, but I think it's more applicable than ever. And there's also the thing you were talking about with the parasocial relationships is very tied to that audiovisual medium. We really seem like real people right now. You connect to us way more. In the same way you connect to ChatGPT more, and this is psychologically verifiable through testing, you connect to it more when it's presented as a text message interaction, as if it is with another person. So the anthropomorphization and personification is something so important to be paying attention to right now.
Yeah, like, our brains don't know that each person listening to this conversation isn't part of the conversation. You can satisfy hunger by having the mental image or watching videos or thinking in a very visual way about eating a meal.
Right.
It tricks your body into feeling full, like you've eaten something. And so we do that with social media. There's nothing wrong with that, but we need to realize that that's the way our brains work. And that, that was the magic of some of Twitter, which was like, you could send off these text messages and it felt like you were in a casual conversation with a group of people, and you didn't realize that it was in some ways a one-way conversation. And that's powerful because then you can choose to sort of slide into the parasocial relationship with everyone. So the question is, you are a creator. You are someone who studies these things. You are someone that uses these things. The audience of this podcast is people who want to understand how they got created, and is very much a community of people who are building these things. And I've been trying to open it up and have the conversations with people. So what do you want us to do? What should we be doing with these platforms? Where should we be taking this?
I think the most irresponsible thing you can be doing is doing what those racist AI slop creators are doing, which is identifying with the metric instead of the target. Our target should be spreading ideas, right? Influencing, not creating content, which is something that is contained by the platform, something which the implication of content is you're making something that is kind of like the contents of a box or drawer is held in the medium of social media. And what that means is content is something that can be scaled up, mass produced, something that's interchangeable with other content, whether it's AI slop or human generated content with depth and meaning, or whether it's just some stupid video. All this is treated as the same by the platform because it's all for their financial incentive. When you make content, you are helping them. When you are influencing, I like the term influencer a lot better. You are actually here to make an impact. It's irresponsible to not be aware of the impact you are having. And if you make any videos or make anything online, honestly, you should be considering who the audience is, what you're doing here. Is it harmful? And yeah, these platforms are kind of bad in what they're doing. How can we subversively harness that to our own ends? I think that's really important. I also think for anybody who's consuming videos, remember that it's not for you. Remember that personalization is a facsimile so they can sell you things. Remember that, these are not neutral medium. They are all biased. From writing to speech to algorithms, everything has a bent. in one direction or another, and you need to be aware of how you can be manipulated by that.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. I absolutely appreciate your time. Thank you for your book. I recommend everyone read Algospeak. It's a fascinating read. And the audiobook is super fascinating, both because of the way you speak it, but also learning about the experience itself is fascinating for how you present it. I look forward to watching many more of your videos. I encourage everyone to check out your stuff. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very glad to be here.
Thanks again to the etymology nerd, Adam Aleksic, for coming on revolution.social. Our intro and outro music is a remix of the Italian anti-fascist song Bella Ciao, courtesy of White Records.
This episode was edited and produced by Eric Johnson from lightningpod.fm. Our executive producer is me, Alice Chan from Flock Marketing.
To learn more about the Social Media Bill of Rights, sign up for our email newsletter, visit revolution.social. Adam's new book is called Algospeak, How Social Media is Transforming the Future of Language. You can find the link in the description.
For more interviews like this one, follow revolution.social on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Nosta's Fountain.fm, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And to paraphrase the Zapatistas Subcomandante Marcos, we need a social media revolution to make revolution possible. We'll be back next week. See you then.